The Blue Jewel.
Chapter 7. Part 4. The expedition began the march, Arian riding Kiona with some difficulty. While the orcs, the dwarf, and Vanus rode in the wagon, the rest except Sabu rode on horseback. Everyone was wearing light clothes, the heat in Demember was important. Vanus spurred on the horses pulling the wagon and the group set off, followed by Sabu who closed the group with his terrifying bearing. Advancing through the arid Demember of the south, Arian saw that this area of the kingdom was less inhabited than the north, although there were some small villages scattered among some small forests that were gradually emerging. Shortly before dusk they decided to camp on the side of the road. As was typical in Demember, they used an awning that the wagon had to set up a kind of tent. They lit a small fire around which they sat down. Although it was a summer's day in those desert places, it was cool at night and a little warmth was appreciated. The mercenaries placed a small cauldron on top of the flames of the campfire, and filled it with water, and when it began to boil they added a little like some green flour. "Poof, Gramina, no please." Gosberg complained disgusted when he saw how the food was being prepared. The rest of the mercenaries smiled at the Denkga's complaints since it was not the first time he had protested about the dinner. "Grass?" Arian exclaimed in surprise. "It is a mixture of cereals, a little honey, a piece of dried figs, all ground and dehydrated, water is added and something similar to a porridge is formed." Kush explained. "That's what you eat." Arian thought that this couldn't feed such strong warriors for a whole day. "Yuck, that's what it is, with how delicious a roast duck is." Gosberg complained again, looking contemptuously at the cauldron. "You have a supernatural aim, you could hunt aglo instead of smoking all day." The dwarf protested about the Denkga's complaints as he stared disdainfully at the bowl of Gramina. The dwarf was not enthusiastic about it either. Aris was the one who was cooking, watching the cauldron so that the Gramina did not stick and pouring a bowl to overflowing to each one. Gramina is the field food of the orcs. With a handful of this flour and a little water you feed 2 orcs for a whole day. It is so good that the Black Empire incorporated it as the food of all its legions. It has everything the body needs, its taste is not unpleasant, I would even say it is somewhat tasteless. But to give your opinion, try it for yourself. He poured a bowl for Arian. Taking. Arian looked at the bowl with some suspicion. It had a jelly-like appearance. A tasteless smell, it was a somewhat strange mush. The rest of the group looked at the young woman expectantly. Kush offered her a spoon, picked up some of the grass, looked at it again suspiciously, but finally tasted the food. It burned, so much so that she had to spit out the contents to the laughter of the mercenaries. "Be careful, burn a little," Agnorak said with a laugh. Gosberg offered him some wine in a bottle. Arian drank some, once he recovered from the burn and made sure the grass was cold. At the end he tasted a little of the content of the story and gave his verdict. "Not bad, although I think with some seasoning it would improve its flavor quite a bit." The dinner passed in silence, each one immersed in his thoughts. The one who dined avidly was the Kendali who seemed to like the grass as much as those who had orc blood. Then each one curled up in his blanket, except for Agnorak who asked to be the first to do the guard shift. He was left alone, as always, watching the stars in the light of the blue moon, which rained that night. They woke up at dawn, a quick breakfast that consisted of some fruit and some cookies. At noon they saw a large blue stone monolith with the coat of arms of Demember, a large diamond inside a hexagon. It was the sign that they were on the southern border bordering Olbiana. A garrison from Demember guarded the pass, but they were too busy with their own affairs that foreigners who intended to leave the kingdom, they were not asked, they were too far from their homes. However, the landscape began to become much more fertile. The road continued along the banks of the White River. They had a safe water supply and the weather during the trip would be more pleasant. From time to time small villages appeared whose inhabitants depended on the river for their total subsistence. The trees on the bank were abundant and the group used to rest under its shade to eat and sleep a little. They were a very beautiful place, but the villages were small and very scattered despite being quite fertile and rich land, but full of many ruins, even with human remains strewn about. Arian didn't want to talk about what he was seeing, but his curiosity had to be satisfied. What happened here? Arian asked directly to the magician. Kush was riding next to him. He didn't know what to answer. Aris approached, as he was at the end of the group, and placed himself parallel to the two. The Iron Wars. A long time ago the dwarfs invaded some mines east of Demember. They were defeated by the grandfather of the current king. That was the First Iron War. 30 years ago they did the same thing again in the north, but this time the conflict was on a large scale. In support of Demember, many kingdoms of the Dragon's Ridge allied except for one that betrayed them, Albiona. The dwarfs and the Jewel of the South had made a pact to divide the whole of the ridge, the dwarfs the interior of the earth and the great Albiona the surface. That was the Second Iron War, and again that the company of the Blue Phoenix was put into the service of the crown of Demember. That's why the king looks for iron so far north. Interrupted Arian. If you're curious, they're called Iron Wars, but Demember is rich in minerals but not iron. It was a long and bloody war. The dwarfs did not advance much. The Blue Phoenix Company under De Boek and Gosberg in the mines achieved great victories for Demember. But on the surface things were different. Albiona was vastly superior. The mercenaries in wide spaces could not stand up to the numerical superiority of the soldiers of the Southern Jewel, and the coalition suffered defeat after defeat. Albiona went as far as he wanted. And he stood here, in the South Pass, next to the forest of Fambir. As the dwarfs were defeated, Albiona's iron supply was halted, but Albiona had defeated the Dragon's Ridge League. A peace treaty was signed, where Albiona consolidated all the conquered territories to the south. The dwarfs won some mines from Demember but unimportant, and it was for them a defeat. Albiona's new domains were called New Albiona. Arian saw in the background the Winged Mountains to the west and the forest of Fambir to the east, dividing them the White River in the middle of a narrow plain, called the Southern Pass. So now this area is at peace. Aris looked at the horizon with a certain irony. Albiona has gained ground in the north, but as you can see he does not pay much attention to it. He has some garrison but little else. Even so he has tasted the taste of victory. Demember is next door. It is a small and desirable kingdom, rich in mines full of precious stones. It is only a matter of time before it tries to conquer it. Is that why the king wants the supply of iron? Yes, sooner or later there will be war, and the League of Kingdoms of the Dragon's Back will defend Demember against Albiona, and this time Albiona will not stop until he conquers them all. Sad is the fate that awaits this beautiful place. Arian lamented. The war had only brought misery to this beautiful place. Agnorok, who had been listening to the conversation, approached Arian, who had a sad expression, and wanted to comfort her. Arian, don't worry about what can happen, it's a waste of time, you must focus on what is happening right now. The young woman was silent. Agnorok's words were wise. She should focus on saving her brother right now. What happened to the dragon's dorsal was secondary. They decided to camp in the ruins of an ancient fort. The next morning they would enter the domains of the great kingdom of Albiona proper. The Southern Pass was the name given to a small plain that separated the ranges of the Winged Mountains with the forest of Fambir. It was the natural border of Albiona, the group advancing slowly along the river that crossed the middle of the plain. Arian had some reservations. Aris and his party had worked for the king of Demember, which was not a kingdom allied with Albiona, so they might have trouble getting into Albiona, but the mercenaries were very calm. When they reached the pass, the plain narrowed only 200 meters wide. They arrived at the Southern Pass. A low wall, barely 2 meters high, occupied the entire width of the pass, with a small open gate where the southern path passed. The wall reminded him of the passage of Lower, but vaguely. They met a small garrison of soldiers who, as those of Demember were too busy hating their fate, Albiona had not closed borders. They were only meant to indicate that the great kingdom of the south began there. They spent the night as far away as possible from the garrison. They did not trust the soldiers. There were rumors that some of them were looking for extra income at night to their meager salaries, and smuggling in this area was almost non-existent.